I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916 by Lauren Tarshish. Read by me, Mrs. Elkins. Hello, All Stars. It's me, Mrs. Elkins. I don't know about you, but I am super excited to finish I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916. Today, I am going to read chapters 11 through 15. That will end the book. So, let's get started.
In a small New Jersey town, the unthinkable was about to happen. A shocking discovery was about to be made. A young boy narrowly escapes and tries to warn the town. But who would believe that lurking in the local creek was a shark?
A shark in a creek, miles from the ocean? I did not believe that this could possibly be true. But when I started doing research and I read the newspaper articles about this, I knew that it had to be a part of my series. I'm Lauren Tarshish. I'm the author of I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916. That's right, this happened almost 100 years ago, but people are still talking about it today. Even the most famous scientists back in 1916 knew absolutely nothing about sharks. In fact, most people believe that sharks were absolutely tame as rabbits, is how one scientist put it. So when these attacks first started to happen, nobody believed it. But it was true. In fact, this episode in history helped completely change scientists' attitudes about sharks. And you are going to find out, because you are going to travel back with me to 1916. You're going to meet a boy named Chet who lived through this terrifying experience. Chet actually knows what it feels like to have a shark's jaws chomp on his leg. He lived through this extraordinary time with the people in his town. It was a summer they will never forget.
Do you have what it takes to survive? Find out in I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916. Also, be sure to check out Lauren Tarshish's I Survived Hurricane Katrina 2005.
Chapter 11. Chet stood on the sagging porch of the captain's house. He barely knocked when the front door swung open. The captain stood there with a scowl on his crumpled-up face. He looked at Chet like he'd never seen him before. "Yes," he said. "What is this about?" Chet's heart sank. He thought of what Uncle Jerry had said, that the captain's mind was like Swiss cheese, full of holes and gaps in his memory. "What is it?" the captain said. "Are you selling something? I don't have all day." "Sorry, sir," Chet said. "I didn't mean to bother you." He almost turned around and walked away, but he forced himself to stay put. He stepped forward, close to the captain, and peered right into his eyes. "Captain," he said in a loud voice, "I saw a shark. In the creek. It crashed into me." Chet lifted his shirt to show the angry-looking scrape. The captain stared at Chet's chest. Then he looked into the distance. Did he even know where he was? "I know it sounds impossible, sir. It doesn't make any sense at all." The captain looked back at Chet. "Sure it does," he said. Chet's eyes widened in surprise. The creek empties out into the Raritan Bay, which leads right into the Atlantic. Pirates used to come to these parts, buried their treasure all around here. The captain's eyes kept getting brighter. If the tides are high, the currents are strong, a shark could get swept right up into the creek. Of course it could. "I saw it, Captain," Chet said, more confident now. "It was huge, and its eyes, just like you said." "Killer eyes," the captain muttered. Chet nodded. "Why are you standing here, son?" the captain scolded. "We need to warn people. I'm getting my boat. You get down to that swimming hole. You tell people what you saw." "What if they won't believe me?" Chet asked. The captain put a hand on Chet's shoulder. His grip was very strong. "Go," he said. Chapter 12. Chet started shouting halfway down the big hill. "Get out of the water," he screamed. "Get out! Get out now!" He thundered down the path and onto the dock. "You have to get out. There's a shark." The guys were all there, but they didn't even look at Chet. You have to believe me, Chet insisted. This isn't a joke. You have to get out. You hear that, Monty? Sid said. There's a shark in the creek. We better get out. Sid hoisted himself up onto the dock, and Monty and Dewey followed. Was it working? Were they listening? But then Sid backed up and took a running leap off the edge of the dock. He cannonballed into the creek with such an enormous splash that Chet got drenched. Monty and Dewey dove in after him. Hey, Sid called, if the shark attacks me, you guys can split the $500 reward from that rich guy. That guy's dead, Monty said. Too bad, said Sid. Oh, shark! Monty called through cupped hands. Here, Sharky Shark, come and get us. They hooted with laughter, and Chet stood there totally helpless. That shark was probably long gone. Nobody would ever believe him. For the next 100 years, people around Elm Hills would be talking about Chet Roscoe, the kid who had said there was a shark in the creek. He'd be a big joke like the captain was. Chet felt like running far away, all the way to California. But then he noticed Sid, strangely still in the creek. His face had gone white. His mouth was open like he was going to scream. Chet's insides turned to jelly when he saw the glistening fin moving slowly through the water. What the? Dewey said. Hurry, Chet cried. Get out! Monty and Dewey flew out of the water, but Sid seemed stuck, hypnotized. The shark was closer to the surface now, its black eyes almost glowing, its massive body looming. They all screamed at Sid. Get out! Hurry! Come on, it's coming! Chet heard a motor in the distance, and Captain Wilson's voice shouting, Shark! Shark in the creek! Everyone out! Shark in the creek! Sid didn't budge. The shark was getting closer. Suddenly, before he had a chance to think, Chet was in the water, swimming as fast as he could towards Sid. He grabbed hold of Sid's arm and pulled him. Chet, is it real? Sid gasped. Is it real? Yes, hurry. Monty and Dewey were at the edge of the dock, reaching down for them. Sid hoisted himself up, and Chet planted his hands on the dock. The guys all grabbed his arm to pull him up. Chet was almost out of the water when something caught his leg. At first, it felt like a giant hand was grabbing him. Then it felt like hot nails were boring into his calf. It's got my leg, Chet screamed. Pull, Sid shouted. His friends pulled. They pulled and pulled until Chet was sure he'd be torn in two. After an eternity, his leg finally came free. His friends had hauled him onto the dock, but then the shark exploded out of the water, its jaws wide open, its teeth smeared with blood. Its gaping mouth was coming right for Chet, and then bang! A gunshot shattered the air. Time seemed to stop. The next thing Chet knew, he was sitting on the dock. Everything looked foggy, and people seemed to be moving in slow motion. He heard muffled voices, men's voices, a boat's motor, and the guys saying his name over and over. They were leaning close, still holding on tight to his arms. Chet looked down and wondered what he was doing in a puddle of ketchup. Hadn't he cleaned that up? Why was the puddle getting bigger? Chet realized it wasn't the ketchup. It was blood pouring from his leg. The fog around him grew thicker until Chet couldn't see or hear a thing. Chapter 13. Shark Kills 2 in New Jersey. Creek. A third boy survives, but injuries are grave. July 13, 1916, Elm Hills, New Jersey. A boy and a young man were killed yesterday, July 12th, by a monster shark that made a shocking appearance in Matawan Creek in New Jersey. Lester Stillwell, 11, was killed while swimming with friends in the town of Matawan. Minutes later, Stanley Fisher, 24, was killed as he bravely attempted to rescue young Lester. Farther up the creek, Chet Roscoe, 10, encountered the shark as he swam by himself. He managed to escape and ran into town to alert residents. His cries of warning were ignored, with most residents dismissing his story as a prank. The boy did not give up and later attempted to warn his friends who were swimming behind the Templar tile factory. It was during these efforts that the lad fell into the jaws of the monstrous shark. He was rescued moments later when Captain Thomas A. Wilson shot at the shark with a Civil War musket, scaring the beast away. The brave youth was rushed to St. Peter's Hospital in New Brunswick. Injuries to his leg are described as extremely grave. Chapter 14. Pictures floated in and out of Chet's mind. Fuzzy pictures. Men lifting him off the dock. The inside of Dr. J's motor car. The white walls and white sheets of a hospital. Unsmiling doctors shaking their heads. A pretty nurse with a soft voice. And Uncle Jerry, who always seemed to be sitting right next to Chet. Was Chet asleep? Was he awake? Was he alive or was he dead? It was 2 days before Chet decided for sure he was alive, and 3 more before he understood what had happened to him, that the shark had ripped away part of his calf. Another few seconds and that shark would have taken off his whole leg. It will heal, the doctor said, patting Chet on the shoulder. It will take some time, but your leg will heal. The miracle kid, said Uncle Jerry. That's what the newspapers are calling you, and it's true. By then, Chet had heard about the others, the boy attacked a mile down the creek from Elm Hills, and the man who jumped in to try to save him. Both were dead. Chet's room was filled with flowers and cards from people all over the country, but none of it mattered to him. His leg hurt worse than it had when the shark was biting him. The medicine they gave him made him feel sick and woozy. He wanted Mama and Papa, but their train was still making its way across the country. Every time Chet fell asleep, he woke up suddenly, shaking with fear, his bed soaked with sweat. The terror faded some when he was awake, but somehow that shark was always lurking, its black killer eyes watching him, its bloody teeth glistening. Chet had never felt so alone. Chapter 15. It was Chet's 6th morning in the hospital when there was a knock at the door. He sat up, sure it was Mama and Papa, but it wasn't. Dewey, Sid, and Monty stood in the doorway. Uncle Jerry was right behind them. The hospital was a 2-hour trip from Elm Hills. Had the guys really come all this way to see him? They all looked a little scared, and Chet felt nervous. Were they still mad at him? Chet raised his hand and gave the briefest, tiniest wave, and just like that, the guys came barreling across the room, fighting each other for a spot on his little bed. Their jostling hurt his legs, but Chet couldn't have cared less. "I'll be in the hallway, kiddo," Uncle Jerry said. "I think that pretty nurse likes me." The door closed and all the guys started talking at once. "They dynamited the creek. A guy caught a shark in the bay, says it's the same shark. It was 10 feet long. They cut open its stomach. They found human bones." Of course, Uncle Jerry had told Chet all this, but he didn't stop the guys from telling him again. He liked the sound of their voices around him. He hoped they'd never stop talking. They told him what Captain Wilson was a celebrity, that the newspaper reporters were coming from around the world to talk to him. "Your uncle said your leg will be okay," Dewey said. "You're going to have a huge scar," Sid said. He sounded almost jealous. Chet hadn't looked too closely at his leg when the nurses changed his bandages. That was when it hurt the most. When they washed the wound, he had to keep his eyes closed tight and bite down on a rag to keep from screaming until the cleaning was done. A chunk of flesh was missing from his calf. He'd have more than a scar. He'd have a limp. "Just like me," Uncle Jerry said. "Won't slow you down a bit." "Minnie keeps asking about you," Dewey said. Chet wondered what Minnie could think of a boy with a limp. Sid moved a little closer to Chet. "We're sorry," he whispered. "We're sorry for everything," said Monty. Sid looked like he was about to cry. "It's my fault." "What?" Chet said. "You didn't put that shark in the creek." Sid laughed a little and wiped his eyes on his sleeve. "We should have listened to you," Monty said. "If we had gotten out of the water, you wouldn't have gotten bitten." "And if you hadn't come," Dewey said, "we'd be—" "But if I hadn't played that stupid prank," Chet said, "you would have believed me." "You saved me," Sid said. "You guys saved me," Chet said. He swallowed hard, and they all sniffed a little. Then a hush came over the room, and in that quiet moment, Chet realized something. He and the guys would always be tied together by the terrible things they'd seen, by what they'd done for each other. It was a while before Sid said, "We're calling a truce. No more pranks." As usual, nobody argued with Sid. It was settled. The guys stayed all afternoon until Uncle Jerry poked his head in and said it was time to go. The guys lingered until Uncle Jerry shooed them out the door. "Wait for me," Uncle Jerry told them, and then he closed the door and came over to Chet's bed. "Your mama called the hospital," he said. "She and your papa will be here after dinner tonight." Chet smiled. "You know," Uncle Jerry said, straightening the sheet, "I had an idea. I thought I'd mention it to you." He cleared his throat. "Maybe your papa would like to help me run the diner," Uncle Jerry said. "It's a busy place. I think he might enjoy it. We do well enough, and I sure wouldn't mind having more time to myself." It took Chet a few seconds to understand what Uncle Jerry was saying. "Your papa might decide it's time to settle down," Uncle Jerry said. "I'm not sure he'll say yes, but I guess it's worth a try, don't you think?" Chet opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed to be all stuck together, so he just nodded. "Okay then, kiddo, it's a plan." Chet lay there a while after Uncle Jerry left. He thought about Mama and Papa. He couldn't wait to introduce them to the guys and to Captain Wilson. He struggled to keep his eyes open, but it'd been a long day. Before long, he dozed off. He dreamed that he was an old man, sitting in a diner, telling a story to a gang of boys. He told them about a shark in a creek, a huge killer shark with bloody jaws and coal black eyes. He described how the shark had chased him, how it scared him out of his wits. But in the end, the beast couldn't get him, because Chet hadn't been alone, because his friends had reached out for him. They'd held him tight, and they never let him go. I hope you liked that book. The title again was I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916 by Lauren Tarshish. If you did like that book and it is on your reading level, then when you get a chance to go to Accelerated Reader, the code for the test is 139514. Just take that note down somewhere because you will be STAR testing sometime soon and you can test on that. Again, this is the test number instead of typing in the title, 139514. And I will be bringing you another book very soon. I hope you liked it. And make sure to take a break, get your wiggles out, and then meet your teacher for a fantastic day of learning. If you would like a little bit more, then below this link, I will add another link so that you can read a few books on your own. Until then, I'll see you next week. Happy reading.